Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles. Bishop Howard Hubbard of Albany, New York, recently died abruptly from a stroke at the age of 84. And he was a notorious bishop. He reigned over the Albany diocese for nearly 40 years. And it is not inaccurate to say that he oversaw its decline in every single measure possible, liturgically, theologically, catechetically, and also morally. In fact, he was accused of fostering and promoting the lavender mafia. And his death was also very scandalous. It was followed by scandal because it came about a month after he defied the church and, as a bishop, married a woman. Marriage, of course, ended up being invalid sacramentally because it's not recognized by the church or by God. And then shortly after that, he had a stroke and then he died. But one thing that we did that nobody else has ever done is we did an in-depth investigation into the death of a whistleblower priest in Albany who was linked to Bishop Hubbard, who was trying to blow the whistle on the lavender mafia under Bishop Hubbard, and then was silenced forever. That was Father John Minkler. I'm going to get into all of that in this episode, but before we do so, just a reminder, if you're interested in buying or selling a home, please consider Real Estate for Life. I've used them twice to buy and to sell a home, and I know others as well who have used them, and it's always been a great experience. Not only is your money going to support a faith-based pro-life business, realtor, you also will get the best price, and a cut of their commission from the realtor will go towards the pro-life charity of your choice. And the best part about this is you don't have to spend a single extra penny. So it really is a win-win situation all around. Just go to realestateforlife.org. That is realestateforlife.org. So as I mentioned, last year, December 2022, I did an in-depth investigation. It's called a Spotlight: What Happened to Father Minkler? And it looked at the strange circumstances surrounding the sudden death of Father John Minkler, one morning found dead in his home, face down in his kitchen, allegedly with a suicide note and a bottle of pills. But the more you look into it, the more things do not add up. And there's not a single person who knew him, who works with him, was friends with him, or his family who believe for a single moment that he killed himself. It would have been completely and totally out of character for a priest, faithful, orthodox, who believed suicide was absolutely a mortal sin that sends your soul to hell. None of them believe that he actually killed himself, and they believe that, in fact, the bishop, Bishop Hubbard, was involved. Why is that? Well, let's play a short introductory clip from that spotlight, sort of introducing you to this investigation. Father John Minkler was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Albany in 1972. 5 years later, 38-year-old Howard Hubbard, a graduate of Rome's prestigious North American College, would become the youngest sitting bishop ever to be consecrated in the U.S. Taking the helm in Albany, he would lead it on a downward spiral in faith and morals. All of it documented in a confidential 1995 report authored by Minkler. It was written at the request of New York's Cardinal John O'Connor, a trusted friend of Minkler ever since he served as O'Connor's personal secretary in the military ordinariate. O'Connor would later take that report to Rome, urging the Pope to remove Hubbard. The Pope knew all about Hubbard's corruption and wanted keenly to remove him, but couldn't do so without proof of an actual crime, something O'Connor didn't have.
Between 1977 and 2002, Bishop Howard Hubbard said he was aware of 11 priests who had been accused of sexually assaulting children.
While pages were devoted to the rampant liturgical abuse and heresy propagated under Bishop Hubbard, the most damning complaints were reserved for clerics' homosexual predation. The diocese regularly accepts and ordains seminarians who have been dropped by other dioceses because of their homosexual activity. An Albany physician who works with AIDS patients stated that within a 4-month period, she encountered 2 recently diagnosed AIDS patients who were unknown to each other. They informed her with almost identical stories about their involvement with a ring of homosexual Albany priests, which also included Bishop Hubbard. Father Minkler was a whistleblower, and long before he died, He actually worked with The Wanderer, which is a faithful Catholic journal. He worked with the writer Paul Lukutis to help expose some of the corruption in the Albany diocese. And in 1991, they published a 10-week series titled Agony in Albany. Nobody knew at the time that Father Minkler was the secret source of the leaks coming from the Albany diocese. Nobody knew that he was the one providing information about the corruption and all the shenanigans and all the terrible things going on in the Albany diocese that was now being published and exposed in The Wanderer. The bishop had no idea, but he was not happy about it. And in 2001, Father Minkler is commissioned by Cardinal John O'Connor to put together a letter of all the horrible things happening in the Albany diocese quietly so that he could take it to Pope John Paul II. And that's exactly what happened. But unfortunately, they were unable to remove him because they couldn't prove they'd actually committed a crime. And among the many things noted in the 2001 letter was that Bishop Hubbard was a vain and very vindictive bishop. It says here, quote, priests and laity alike are reluctant to speak against Bishop Hubbard because he tolerates no dissent. Priests who have disagreed with him due to dissenting opinions and practices find themselves frequently transferred, and if they are pastors, find themselves with or without an assistant or with a very liberal assistant who is usually gay. And that's the thing. Witnesses claim that Bishop Howard was an active homosexual and that he promoted active homosexual priests in his diocese, priests leading a double life. Regardless of where you stand on homosexuality, nobody likes a priest who leads a double life. Nobody likes a person who's taken a vow of celibacy and then breaks that vow and lies to the public about it. It's hypocrisy. No matter where you stand in this, it is hypocrisy. If you take that vow and you make that promise, you're bound to that promise. And your flock, they believe you and they are giving you donations based on your promise of fidelity. But if you're secretly leading a double life while fleecing the flock and taking their money and deceiving the flock, that's wicked. And nobody should ever support that. But Bishop Hubbard is someone who is accused of fostering and protecting this lavender mafia. And not just that, Bishop Hubbard was sued. He was named in 7 sex abuse lawsuits. 7, not just for sex abuse cover-up, but for sex abuse itself, for committing sex abuse. And there have been several witnesses who've come out against him. One of them, Thomas Zalay, and then another one, a street hustler named Andrew Bonneau. Let's take a look at this clip. Thomas Zalay died in 1978 at the age of 25 by setting himself on fire in his family home at 905 Myrtle Avenue in Albany. His suicide note named Hubbard among his abusers. Howard explains that his role as bishop and his vows of celibacy are not involved because the Bible describes celibacy as being free of women. Going on to say Hubbard unfairly used his position in the church to get what he wants. Andrew Bonneau, a former street hustler, claimed Hubbard paid him for sex in gay cruising spot Washington Park when Andrew was only 14. He actually looked 10 and was reportedly the favorite among men who liked young boys. We'll be right back with the show, but I'd like to take a moment to encourage you to sign up for a premium subscription if you haven't already. It's only $10 a month, which is a really rock bottom price, and it gets you thousands of hours of content on everything across the board: theology, philosophy, apologetics, history, everything. We have things for little children. We have things for adults. While we give a lot of our content away for free, the work that we do here does not come for free. It costs us money. The $10 a month will go a long way in helping us to continue to produce top quality, faith-based content, all with a view towards spreading truth, ultimately for the salvation of souls. So if you want to support us, please consider signing up for premium at churchmilitant.com/go premium. That's churchmilitant.com/go premium. Thank you so much for your support. In addition to this 2001 letter commissioned by Cardinal John O'Connor, there was another letter. It was handwritten by Father Minkler, and it was sent to Stephen Brady, who's the president and founder of Roman Catholic Faithful. Stephen Brady is a good friend of ours. He's a longtime Catholic investigative journalist who's been trying to expose corruption in the hierarchy for decades. And he was friends with Father Minkler. And he received this letter, this handwritten letter, naming all the names in the lavender mafia. Let's take a look at this clip.
He asked me to help gather more information on some of these individuals because he felt obliged, because they were priests and because of their job, obviously, and their vocation. He felt an obligation to help put an end to this.
These handwritten notes that he sent you, they are a list of all the homosexual clergy at the time in Albany.
That he knew of.
That he knew of.
What he knew about. And he also mentioned Bishop Hubbard in here.
Long before working with Brady, Minkler also worked with the late Paul Locutus of the Catholic paper The Wanderer. Together, they published a 10-week series in 1991 titled Agony in Albany, exposing the predatory underbelly of the diocese under Hubbard's reign. Stephen Brady actually spoke with Father Minkler the day before he died, and Minkler was very upset, and what he told him is that he was essentially forced to go down to the chancery, and there was an affidavit that was already written out, typed out, and he had to sign his name to it, essentially denying that he was author of this 2001 letter commissioned by Cardinal John O'Connor, because it became public, okay? It became known through a news report. And Bishop Hubbard was extremely upset. And this is what Minkler told Brady on the phone. I was forced to sign this affidavit, and now I have to go to confession because I had mental reservations while I signed it, and he didn't feel right about that.
I did not, nor have ever written such a letter. To my knowledge, I have never met, nor have I ever spoken to a Mr. John Aretakis. I have never made such allegations regarding Bishop Hubbard. I have never, in writing or otherwise, communicated with the Archdiocese of New York regarding such allegations. I make this statement of my own free will, and I know that making a false statement is a crime. Signed, Reverend John A. Minkler.
2 days later, Minkler would be dead. According to Minkler, it was the chancellor at the time, Kenneth Doyle, who had that affidavit all typed out. And like I said, he signed it with mental reservations, but then felt bad about it afterwards and told Brady over the phone, I have to go to confession. I have to go to confession because, I shouldn't have signed it. And I myself have spoken to people extremely close to the situation. Extremely close. I can't say who they are, but let's just say that they are unimpeachable sources. Very close to Father Minkler. They do not believe for a moment that he committed suicide. And in fact, they've never seen the suicide letter. And they should be the ones to have seen it first. And they never have in 20 years. So they do not believe, as the news media claims, as the diocese claims, that there was a suicide note. They don't believe that. They believe that the entire thing was staged and that Bishop Hubbard was involved in the death of Father Minkler. And like I said, suicide was entirely out of character for someone like Father Minkler. This was a faithful Orthodox priest who believed that killing himself is a mortal sin and it would have sent his soul to hell. And he never, ever, according to people who knew him, never would have done this sort of thing. Minkler was supposed to meet with Hubbard on Monday, February 16th, but that meeting never happened. On Sunday morning, his sister Patricia would find his body on the kitchen floor. The immediate claims were that it was a heart attack. 2 months later, that story changed. An April 7, 2004 Albany Times-Union report revealed there was a bottle of pills and an alleged suicide note found next to Minkler's body. Up to that point, Bishop Hubbard had endured withering criticism and suspicion regarding Minkler's death, with headlines swirling about the private meeting between the bishop and the priest's sudden death 2 days later. With the suicide ruling, that speculation stopped. So it's very interesting that immediately after his death, the claims were that it was a heart attack. But that changed 2 months later. 2 months later, you suddenly hear from the coroner that no, it was ruled a suicide, without any real explanation. And what's very interesting is that within that 2 month period, from Father Minkler's death up to this change of claim about suicide, headlines were swirling all over the place in New York, suspecting Bishop Hubbard of having taken part in his death. Because here's the thing. Father Minkler was supposed to meet Bishop Hubbard on Monday, February 16th of 2004. He's supposed to meet him on that Monday, but he's found dead that Saturday. And he had just come from the Tantry that Friday. So it was sandwiched. His death was sandwiched between two meetings with the bishop, two secretive meetings with the bishop. And so, of course, headlines were swirling all over the place, implicating Bishop Hubbard in the potential the death of Father Minkler. But as soon as that suicide ruling came down from the coroners, all of that speculation stopped. Even so, Bishop Hubbard commissioned a so-called independent investigation into the death of Father Minkler, including looking into the suicide claims. And the hope was to make it look to everybody like, oh, look, here I am commissioning a very independent investigation because I really want to get down, to the bottom of the truth on this. I want to get to the truth. And, here I am trying to really find out what happened to this priest. Well, it turns out that the former federal prosecutor they hired, Mary Jo White, who charged at the time more than $700 an hour, which was a lot of money back in 2004, and it's a lot of money today. That investigation ended up totally exonerating Bishop Hubbard. And so many critics, including myself, say that the investigation was actually a sham. But what's really interesting is this former federal prosecutor came down with the conclusion of inconclusive with regard to the suicide. So let's take a look at some of the findings that she determined with regard to the alleged suicide of Father Minkler. Even the investigator admitted things didn't add up. Certain of Father Minkler's statements and actions on February 13th and 14th are inconsistent with someone who was planning on taking his own life. Namely, on February 13th, 2004, 2 days before he was found dead, Father Minkler scheduled 2 future retreats at Spencer Abbey. That same day, he told a fellow priest he was thinking about buying a new home. On Saturday at the VA, he left instructions with a secretary for the preparation of a program for a memorial service which was to be held on February 26, 2004, and which listed him as the celebrant. That day, he also spoke with his nephew about getting dinner in the future. And that night, he discussed plans to visit a friend's mother in order to see her townhouse because Father Minkler was considering purchasing a similar unit. That night, he discussed potential legal action against John Aretakis. After getting an attorney referral, he told his friend he would call the lawyer tomorrow and leave a message. The diocesan report admits the investigation is unable to conclude why Father Minkler decided to take his life. It's very important to note that the prosecutor was never able to get her hands on the suicide note. She was never able to. So whatever she heard about it was hearsay based on what anonymous sources told her the note said. So as far as I know, nobody's really ever seen the suicide note. We don't even know if it exists. And even if it does exist, how do we know that he's the one who penned it? How do we know that it wasn't staged and just placed there with this bottle of pills? Something else I note in my report from speaking to knowledgeable sources that the pills that were lying next to him were not the type of pills that you would take to commit suicide, like, for instance, sleeping pills or anything like that. They were muscle relaxers. You don't take muscle relaxers to kill yourself. And that's what they were, because according to people who knew, that was the prescription that he was on. And so that just doesn't make sense. And what's really interesting, too, is that this case has so many similarities to that of Father Joseph Marino. That was another in-depth investigation that I conducted called Spotlight, Death of a Whistleblower Priest. I encourage you to go watch it because it really is fascinating. There's so many inconsistencies about the death of Father Joseph Marino. He was another New York priest, and he was found, but he was from Buffalo, and he was found dead in his home on October 13th, 2012 with a gunshot wound to the head. But it was on this side, and he was right-handed. He couldn't even use his left hand because it was crippled. He couldn't use it. And so the medical examiner who determined that it was a suicide, basing that ruling on what the police told her, and rather than an independent investigation of her own, said that one possible scenario is that he held up the gun like this, even though he didn't have the strength in his crippled left arm even to hold up the gun. But he's holding up this gun, and that he went like this and then pulled the trigger and shot himself that way. I don't even need to say anything for you to understand how ridiculous that is. But that's seriously the death scenario for Father Joseph Marino. But just like Father Minkler, Father Marino was making all sorts of plans, in the following days of his so-called suicide, making dinner plans with his twin sister, buying lottery tickets, all sorts of things that he was making plans for. And then suddenly he just kills himself out of the blue. Again, a priest, faithful Orthodox, who believes that killing oneself is a mortal sin. And again, he was another whistleblower priest who was trying to expose corruption in the Buffalo diocese and found dead. But returning to that handwritten note that Minkler sent to Stephen Brady listing all the names of the Lavender Mafia, Father Minkler ended up being vindicated in so many ways. Now, it came after his death, unfortunately, but some of those names that he named there, saying we need to watch out for these people because they're active homosexuals and they're leading double lives. He warned about these individuals, and it turns out that he had every reason to warn people of these individuals. Here is one in particular, Father Gary Mercure, who was named by Father Minkler in his handwritten letter. Then there's Father Gary Mercure.
A mental case, was removed as pastor because of homosexual activity. Now a pastor with a school, likes to talk about sex and associate with gay lay people.
Now, we know the story of former priest Gary Mercure, that he was convicted of raping 2 boys in the Berkshires. Now, he is currently in a Massachusetts prison serving a 25-year sentence for that.
Mercure has a close relationship with Hubbard, who's often visited him in prison. The 2 boys weren't his only victims. There were many more.
One alleged victim said Mercure sexually abused him and asked him to keep the priest's pornography at his house so it would not be found at the rectory. Another accuser, according to the documents, stated he was fondled by Mercure in the priest's bedroom at the rectory. A statement from a former employee of St. Teresa of Avila said that there was a, quote, constant procession of young boys to his room. In those same documents, the former employee's brother gave a statement saying he too was abused by Mercure, a family friend.
2 of Mercure's victims, who testified in his 2011 criminal trial, claimed Bishop Hubbard took part in the sexual assaults. From a June 26, 2022 article in the Times-Union. The men, now in their 40s, for the first time are publicly asserting that Mercure and Hubbard sexually abused the older brother on multiple occasions during encounters at Lake George motels, in the rectory of Our Lady of Annunciation in Queensbury, and in Mercure's vehicle in Albany. Abuse usually occurred in connection with events such as Christmas Mass or confirmation ceremonies. The victim said Mercure on occasion drove him to Albany, and they would pick up Hubbard and drive into a park. He described a setting that appeared to resemble Washington Park, and pick up male prostitutes or men interested in having sex with strangers. So will we ever know whether Bishop Hubbard played a role in Father Minkler's death? Probably not. We'll probably never know, not until we get to the other side. But his life is instructive, and other bishops should look at the life and death of Bishop Hubbard and recoil in fear and horror and ensure that they do not lead such lives, such totally faithless and scandalous lives. By the way, Father James Martin calls Bishop Hubbard his hero. Yeah, there's a picture of him standing with Bishop Hubbard, calling him his personal hero. So that should tell you everything you need to know about Father James Martin. Now, I don't know what happened in Bishop Hubbard's final moments. He had a stroke. He died a day later. I don't know what happened when he was incapacitated. I don't know the way the Holy Spirit was working in him, or God, or I don't know if he made a final act of contrition. I don't know. Not my place to judge. But if he refused God's mercy at the end of his life, if he refused to make an act of contrition and recognize his sins and the evils that he had committed in his life, if he refused that, then he has gone to hell. He's not in a pleasant place. And other bishops need to take note and ensure that they themselves are being faithful. In fact, all Catholics should take note. Look at that and say, I want nothing to do with that. I don't want to live that way. I don't want to die that way in scandal, leaving a legacy of scandal. So if you want to watch this entire documentary, please just go to our website and find Spotlight, What Happened to Father Minkler. That was December 2022. And it's really a fascinating, in-depth investigation. First of its kind. Nobody has ever done this before with regard to, looking at all the aspects of the Father Minkler death and speaking to various sources and documentation, that sort of thing. But please feel free to go watch it and share it and let me know what you think. As always, I love to receive your messages. Just write me at forwardboldly@churchmilitant.com. That is forwardboldly@churchmilitant.com. Please pray for me. I will remember all of you in my prayers, and I want to thank you so much for your support and your messages of kindness, and also for your prayers. In the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly.